What I want to talk to you about today is about the revolution in molecular biology and genetics that's going on and where that's likely to carry us. So I'm going to step back and look at some very big picture stuff and also look at some of the more interesting things, some of the unexpected paths that are opening up towards the development of new therapeutics. And I'm going to talk a little bit about coffee and about something that we've found in coffee that's very, very useful, and talking a little bit about Alzheimer's. And what I want to say is that there's something that's very, very profound and extraordinary that's happening at this instant in time. And that is that we are opening up our biology, the stuff of life. We're understanding how it works. And we're beginning to alter and manipulate it. And it means that we're beginning to have the capacity and are actually beginning to alter ourselves in some way, in a variety of ways. And this is really something fundamental and very profound. It harkens to what Tom said this morning about there not being repetition and cycles, but the future as something that is not represented in the past necessarily. It's not a repeat of it. And if you have any doubts about how big a deal this is, then the next time you take a stroll through Manhattan, through these valleys of glass and stainless steel and concrete that are all around you, think about it. This is not the stomping ground of our Pleistocene ancestors. We have completely refashioned the world around us and how we're living and where we're living. And what is happening now, if you step back, is that our powers are becoming much greater, much more profound, of our technology really, and they're becoming very precise, and we're turning them back upon our own selves. And in the bigger picture, in the larger sweep of things, we are going to alter ourselves and remake ourselves in ways that are as profound as we have reshaped the external world around us and come to take for granted as almost natural. We live in this environment that we've created. And in the process of doing this, it's not only going to transform us, but it is going to change medicine and healthcare. That's going to be the first thing that happens. It's going to change the way we have children. That's also beginning to happen. It is going to alter the way we manage and shape our emotional states. It is going to change our lifespans, probably. These are very, very fundamental, profound things. And to understand this and see it, once again, I want you to step back for a moment, because there are two things that are occurring right now in our lifetimes that we get to watch and participate in that are profound breakthroughs, not in the history of human life, in the transitions that have occurred in human history, but in the history of the universe, in the history of life itself. The first of these is the revolution, the Silicon Revolution. And you think, we had to turn off our cell phones, and you have artificial intelligence and all these sorts of things. What is happening is that we are taking the inert sand at our feet, the silicon dioxide that we walk on, and we're breathing a level of complexity into it that rivals life itself. Now think about that. We're animating the inanimate world around us, and nothing will ever be the same. 1 billion years from now, whoever or whatever is around is going to look back at this as a transitional moment in the history of life, in the history of the universe. So that is one very profound thing. And a child of that revolution is the second revolution, which is the revolution in molecular biology and genetics. And basically that is that life is coming to understand its own processes and is taking control of those processes, altering them in a variety of ways, and also taking control of the evolutionary process itself and beginning to influence in a conscious way its future. So these are very, very big things. And the big question of our era is actually which of these two revolutions is going to dominate? Is the next cutting edge of life going to shift from a substrate of carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, of flesh and blood, to silicon and its yolk? to the computer chip, and there are many people who have argued that that will be the case. And I think the arguments are actually pretty good. But actually they're moot, because what matters to us and our children and their children are the biological insights and the sort of biological capabilities that are arriving today. Because, hello, we're flesh and blood. These are the things that are going to have impacts on us. And, you know, what does it matter what kind of technology is around us if our brains are turning to mush because of Alzheimer's? So, what I want to talk about in looking at the biotech revolution is what its immediate impacts are going to be. And I'll just sort of shape those. These would be a topic for a much longer talk, and I'm going to try and stay to about 20 minutes, so I won't get into these. But nonetheless, I want to mention them that the first wave of change, which will happen in the next, 15, 20 years, 25 maybe, is very big, because there's going to be, we're just going to be inundated by this tsunami of biological information about our genetics, about our metabolic testing, all sorts of things that are going to tell us a great deal about ourselves and that are going to alter medicine and healthcare. They're going to make it more predictive, much more personalized, and much more preventive. And that's going to have huge challenges for the entire system that exists and for society as a whole. But it will sort of come under the umbrella of healing that we associate with medicine and healthcare. The second wave, which will be a generation or two from now, or if you're very conservative about the way this is going to play out, maybe 3 or 4 generations from now, is going to really alter everything in much, much deeper ways. And remember, when we're talking about 50 or 100 years, this is just an instant in the history of in human history and in the history of life, certainly. And that's going to be when we begin to tinker and remake our biology and alter and adjust our biology in a variety of ways. And that is basically the next frontier is going to be not space, which we thought of in the 60s, but it's going to be our own selves. And that is something that's really extraordinary. The issues there are the kinds of things that we're going to shift, basically. And I'm not going to get into these in detail because I want to talk about some specific things. Our human reproduction, and that certainly already occurred. My daughter, my beautiful 5-year-old daughter, was conceived in a petri dish. This is a big thing. Now, that's just the beginning. As we begin to really understand what genetics tells us about who we are, we're going to want to make choices about the genetics of our children. And there will be all sorts of aspects of that will come into play. It's going to be very, very controversial. We're not going to agree about any of it, but it's very much going to happen, and it's shown that because so many people want it to occur and are interested in it if it were possible, and it will be. The second is we're going to rework our biology in significant ways, and that doesn't mean we're going to have wings or gills or some sci-fi sort of things of this sort. But what about something we care about, like maybe the fundamental process of aging? Someone talked about living to be 100. Well, what if we understand aging to the extent that we can intervene in that process and retard it or reverse it in a variety of ways, which is actually not that much harder, and you add an extra 10 or 20 or 30 or more years, not of decrepitude, which nobody cares about, but of vitality. It would remake everything about the way we live. The transfer of wealth from one generation to another, education, the family, everything would change. And a couple of leading biogerontologists actually have said that the first person to live to be 150 years old is probably already alive today. Probably not me. Be great, but my daughter, maybe. So that's the second area. The third is really interesting too, and that's managing our emotions. Prozac, Ritalin, Viagra, these are just the clumsiest of baby steps. What happens when we begin to understand the functioning of the brain and the way the brain works in a way that's subtle enough and incisive enough that we could actually mix up a cocktail of pharmaceuticals and you could take them and feel contented. Feel happy to just be you doing what you're doing, or maybe even feel fulfilled. Would you be able to resist that? I think not. Or if you did, it'd be surprising. But if you didn't, then who would you be? I mean, why would you be doing what you're doing? And this is a whole class of things where we develop insights so that we can short-circuit all sorts of behavioral programs that were required of us to gain certain feelings that channeled our behavior in ways that were very, very suitable for biological success. I mean, it's not a surprise that sex feels so good. Same thing with sweets, though. Sweets taste really good because, well, it's great to go and get some fruit. I mean, that's a high-energy food. But we weren't built to be living in a pastry shop, and so now we're all focusing enormous amounts of energy not to become obese, and that's actually a bigger problem than hunger today, even in the developing world. So not everything that can be done should be done or will be done, but we will go down this path, and we'll do it for two reasons. One is it's just trivial to do it because it's just an offspring, an offshoot of all the mainstream medical research towards disease that everybody is funding to tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And the second is that we're humans. We do this sort of thing. We try to use technology to enhance our lives in a variety of ways, and we will fret endlessly about it, and we will go ahead and do it anyway. And it's going to take us to some very weird and strange places. But what I want to talk about for the rest of my time is some sort of, this is this big current flowing forward, and it's very robust. It's not going to change. We are going to go to these places. It's going to happen very quickly. And I think it's a privilege to be able to observe it, to be able to participate in it, and we're the objects of it too, so of course we're anxious about it. But some of the sort of back currents that are occurring, which to me are very, very interesting, and they're not the kinds of things you'd expect. And you know, it's been 9 years since the sequencing of the human genome, and where are all the wonder drugs? Cancer, heart disease are still the #1 killers. I'm still getting gray. You know, what's happening? And what's interesting is that it's very, very difficult to do these sorts of things because the regulatory networks that make us up, that coordinate the activities of the interactions among our cells within the biochemistries of our individual cells, very complicated, and it's a lot harder to go in, even if you know the gene for this or that, to go in and develop some sort of a therapeutic that's going to intervene in that process. But there's an easier approach, and I think that's something that's going to be very, very promising and very interesting, the results of that within the next generation. And that is that we can use this newfound knowledge about how biology works, about who we are, about what we are, to understand many of the natural products that actually have impacts on our biology and on health and wellness. And what I mean about this, things that are possible that haven't been previously possible, I'm going to illustrate that with coffee and Alzheimer's, and something that we've been doing at Signum Biosciences that I think will have a big impact on the way pharmaceuticals are developed generally, and certainly on the diseases of Alzheimer's and diabetes. And that is, so we identified, actually this came out of Princeton University, and I moved from California at UCLA to Princeton to found the company Signum Biosciences and work this and develop this with my brother whose lab this was coming out of at Princeton. And there's a major phosphatase in the body. It's called PP2A. And a phosphatase is something that removes phosphates from all sorts of regulatory proteins. There are also a whole class of proteins called kinases that add phosphates. And it turns out that whether something is phosphorylated or not, a regulatory protein either upregulates or downregulates hundreds of the enzymes in your body. So basically, this is a master switch, a control mechanism. There are hundreds of kinases. There are only 2 phosphatases, and they're related to each other. I say this because it's just balancing a whole bunch of these regulatory sort of loci. And so our idea, or his idea, and there was a lot of theoretical reasons for believing it, is that dysregulation at this site is something that is at the heart of a lot of illness. And you can connect it to Alzheimer's, to diabetes, to heart disease. And it's funny, but you know, a lot of these fairly diverse diseases have very similar risk factors to them. And so the way you'd normally look at a target like this would be, okay, great, that's a site where we're going to be able to intervene and develop some drug. So now we'll look at a library of hundreds of thousands of chemicals or a million chemicals. You'll screen them rapidly. You'll identify all sorts of things that impact this site. And then you'll go and you'll synthesize other variants of these chemicals. You'll try and understand which ones have consequences when you put them into the body, which ones are toxic. You'll run profiles. You'll do experiments with animals. It's a huge, huge process. And if you really were intimately knowledgeable about it, you would wonder how any drugs are developed today. Because you're trying to come up with reasons that it's worth spending 10 or 30 or 40 million dollars to put this into clinical trials. So we thought, well, you know, this is an idea, and it's easy to come up with stories about why things are important or why they work. But if we're right, where are therapeutics likely to be? Well, what about medicinals, botanicals, medicinal herbs that are purported to have activity for these conditions, for cognitive conditions, for heart disease, for diabetes, and which there's so much noise and so much garbage out there because it's just stories. But it's because it's the basis of uncontrolled trials by observers who aren't terribly sophisticated, using materials that are pretty uncertain in what their origins are and what their compositions are, without really very complete diagnoses, over many, many generations, over 1,000 years or so, and you get ideas about whether things work or not. So we said, well, let's look at these, and if none of them have impacts on this enzyme, then probably we're wrong. So we didn't go and look at 1,000 things. We picked a couple of dozen that are really common: coffee, tea, chocolate, ginkgo biloba, St. John's wort, a few things that for some reason or other have gotten into very broad distribution around the world. And it turns out about 1/3 of them affect this locus. So we said, boy, that's interesting. Well, but we wanted to go in, and we took coffee, because coffee, I don't know, how many of you drink coffee? I can't even see, but I'm sure it's a lot of you. Yeah, a lot of hands here. So it's great stuff. The epidemiology of coffee is such that if you drink 4 more cups of coffee a day, and it doesn't matter if it's caffeinated or decaffeinated, your risk of type 2 diabetes is about 50% of the normal population. And that's controlling for everything you can think of controlling for on the side. For Parkinson's, it's about 50%. It's associated with caffeine, but not entirely. Alzheimer's, it's significantly reduced. The data isn't quite as good. So we looked at coffee, because that was very interesting. Coffee was very active in affecting this. We went through, and in a couple of years, we identified what the actual molecule was that was responsible for that. We didn't know whether it would be one or many, whether it would be some kind of gunk, or who the hell knows. It turned out it's a very drug-like little molecule. And the reason you'd think these things would be in natural products is that if you think of what a drug is, many drugs are really small molecules that are diffusible and are able to act at these key loci in our biochemistries. Well, cells have been interacting with one another for billions of years, trying to kill each other, trying to entrain each other's behavior, trying to alter each other's behavior, trying to cooperate. So if something is susceptible to a diffusible molecule, and it's going to have some meaningful impact on cellular biochemistry, it's probably already out there, either from something external or from some other cells in the body. So we found out what this molecule was. I can't tell you because of intellectual property, but you wouldn't recognize it anyway, but it's very interesting. It looks like a drug. The bottom line is it affects cells just like you'd expect, and you feed it to mice. You can't get a lethal dose. You can give them like 1,000 cups of coffee worth of it a day, and it doesn't do anything to them in an obvious way. It penetrates the blood-brain barrier. It reduces levels of something called tau, which is associated with tangles, which are associated with Alzheimer's. And it actually reduces glucose levels in the blood of obese mice. If you make an obese mouse model, it reduces glucose levels, doesn't seem to do anything else. And So it's interesting that one of the countercurrents associated, and I think this applies to architecture and who we are and has lots of implications, but one of the countercurrents associated with this incredible process of understanding who we are and what life is, and has all sorts of possibilities of really strange and dramatic reshapings of who we are and what we are, and these things will come to pass, reflects and adjusts our we can take advantage of all of the knowledge that has been accumulated about the natural world and about our place in the natural world. And it reminded me of a quote from T.S. Eliot that I thought was very interesting, where he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." And to me, that sense of, at the time that technology is becoming so powerful and is allowing us to have such incredible influences over the world around us and reshapings of the world that we inhabit, that humility about acknowledging and sort of stepping back and thinking about who we are biologically, psychologically, emotionally, and integrating that information in ways that take advantage of that and play off of that is a very interesting lesson. And to me, I feel very, very excited about the world of today and moving to the world of tomorrow. To me, it would be astonishing if at this instant in time, when there are fundamental things that truly will be looked at as transitional 1 billion years from now, and we, or whoever what we have become, I believe will be around hundreds of millions of years from now, that this is occurring right now, and we don't think that a birth like this is going to be a little traumatic, that things are going to be shaken up. I think it's obvious that that's going to occur, and it doesn't mean that this is not an extraordinarily robust development. And in the discussion that follows, I would be happy to, discuss that and argue about the robustness of this and the possibilities of the future with anyone. So thank you very much.